Call the meeting to order now. Roll call.
Committee member Stephenson.
Present.
Chair Mooney.
Here.
Committee member Castillo White.
She said she was going to call in. I haven't seen her.
Committee member Andrews.
Here.
Committee member Knight.
I haven't seen her.
Committee member Rizzo.
Here.
Committee member, I'm gonna say it wrong again. Hester.
Here.
Committee member Hutchinson.
Here.
Committee member Prickett.
Here.
Vice Chair Allen.
Here.
And the alternate, Kendra was not here.
I don't see.
He did email me that he would not be making it.
All right.
Do the Pledge of Allegiance. Zach is going to lead us.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? No? Don't think we have anybody online.
All part of our committee.
He just likes it.
Paul, do you have any comments?
No, thanks.
All right. We will turn it over to Marlene.
Great, thank you. So discussion, item number 3 is a discussion, and we have 2 items to discuss tonight. First is an update on land use application 0013-2023, which, if you will recall from our previous meeting, the TCAB made a motion to request that the application be modified to a type 3 review, which is reviewed and decided upon by Planning Commission. And there was also a motion to include a brief summary of the meeting in that recommendation. So what I did to make that request was write comments for the actual application itself. And through some review with the planning division and the community development director, it was determined that we can't modify the type of review in the middle of the review. So if we had, she would be able to bump it up to type 3 review potentially if the review had not already started, but since it had already begun, we couldn't do it mid-cycle. So what I ended up writing, which is in your packet, is the letter that I included in the comments for the application that basically summarized very briefly our conversation at the meeting, and then had a proposed condition of approval, which was to make it a type 3 review. And if the current application could not be modified, I wrote that TCAB requests that the existing application be denied and any subsequent applications be reviewed as a type 3 procedure. That wasn't really explicitly what you guys had stated, but I figured that covered our bases on requesting a type 3 review. And these are proposed conditions, so they don't have to necessarily include them. They're just ones that we can request that they include. Dakota is now in the current process of reviewing the application. He's received all the comments back from all the different review agencies and entities, and is currently reviewing that. And so a decision hasn't been made yet. John?
Diane says she is currently in the
Oh,
waiting
I see.
room.
So these comments will be included in the staff report for the final decision that is made on this application. And what I clearly stated was the role of the Town Center Advisory Board, what the project was proposing, what the preferred uses were for opportunity site number 12, the Peninsula Track. And then how at our meeting we discussed this, we identified it does not meet any of those. And then we also had concerns regarding floodplain, vegetation corridor, the shared private drive with neighbors, and that the neighbors echoed those same concerns. And then obviously the condition of approval we were requesting. So if there is any discussion on that, we can have it now.
Appreciate it. It sounds like you did a good job covering all the bases best we could, given the circumstances.
Thanks.
So it is my understanding that that drive is, they have an easement on that drive.
Yeah. So I was taking a look at some of their documents when I was making these comments, and they did not include a copy of the plat with easement language on their survey, like in their actual civil plans. It makes reference to some easement language, but that actual easement language wasn't included in the application. So I did, in conversation with Dakota, mention that this easement language wasn't included, and that, you know, we don't know what the easement language says if they don't include it. So that's probably something that's a public record on Multnomah County's website that we can look up, which he'll probably do during his review, but it wasn't something they included in there. There was two specific things that I mentioned to him that I noticed. It was tracked. I think that the private drive is under tracked, let's see, tracked A, and then tracked B is the private open space, which is in the rear Beaver Creek side of all the lots. So it mentions both of those tracks, but it doesn't have the specific tract language to know exactly what it states. And there was no wetland delineation in the documents that were submitted. So unable to determine the exact boundary of the vegetation corridor. And the Department of State Lands they need a wetland delineation to determine if a removal fill permit is required, so. There's a separate application on this property, so the floodplain application was processed separately from this one. I think that just happened out of confusion when we lost our community development director, like something I don't know, I'm not really sure what happened, but they're separate. So that's another sort of strange thing to call out, is that the floodplain review is being reviewed separately from the rest of the application, which Dakota and I have talked about how in the future those should go together, which it all came in prior to him working with the city. So he didn't have a say in any of that, but we just had a conversation about it.
Has there been any public comments on this yet?
I don't believe that we received any formal public written comment.
Is the public aware? That's the question I have. I thought there was going to be some announcement so that the public knew about this and could comment.
So with the application, the city notifies the surrounding property owners within 250 feet. So surrounding property owners were notified of the application. This is separate to this application specifically, and just my personal opinion about how we communicate with the public about land use applications. I don't think that it's really difficult to notify people who aren't property owners of what's going on. And so one of the things that's really obvious with this application is because there is a property that has a large number of rental units on it with the RV park adjacent, there's not really a really effective way to communicate the application to anyone who's not a property owner, so they're not necessarily receiving the communication if the property owner isn't relaying it to them. So we're having internal conversations within the planning and community development department on should we consider alternative ways of notifying the public of land use applications. Tanny?
But if the application was handled as a type 3, there would be a sign posted on the
Yes.
property saying there was a potential development.
Yes, that's true. And surrounding property owners within 500 feet would be notified. Now, one of the conversations that we've had internally about this whole, so right now what they did follows the development code as it's written. That doesn't mean that we couldn't internally decide that a higher level of notification should be done for type 2 applications. So we're having conversations about should type 2 applications receive physical postings on the property as well. So like if you go through the city of Portland, you'll notice anytime there's a development application, you see a posted sign about the development proposal. And that helps inform the public. I've never received a notice about a surrounding property being developed, but there's 2 different apartment complexes that are going in near my house in Portland. And by just walking by and seeing the posted development notices, I'm aware of those. And those aren't planning commission reviewed applications. They're just their staff reviewed applications. So that was one of the things that we've been talking about is should we be doing more for the type 2 applications to help better inform the public so that neighbors can just feel aware about what's going on. Because currently we're only notifying property owners, which isn't inclusive of the entire population of the city. So this has sparked a lot of internal discussions.
Right. Okay, anybody else have comments? Anybody on Zoom have comments?
The only comment that I would make is I think it'd be a really good idea to have a sign posted for the public to see. That's a very high traffic, I mean, that's a very main thoroughway coming into downtown and the park there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is all of our site development reviews. So anytime there's a site development review, it's either type 1 or type 2. There is no such thing as a type 3 site development review. And so unless it's associated with a variance or a conditional use permit or another application that is type 3. So we're not posting notices for any site development reviews unless they're coupled with the higher type review. So there's a lot of, I mean, the site development reviews are on, I mean, almost everything requires a site development review. So if we posted them for type 2s, then we'd be informing more of the public of what type of development is happening within the city, which I think from attending a number of public meetings, seeing public comments online, all sorts of things, like I feel like that is a concern as people just want to know what's going on. They might not necessarily be concerned with what the development is, but they just want to be aware of what's happening. So I am personally in favor of us posting notices for type 2 applications. But
so what happens to the application when they did not include the easement language?
not including the easement language isn't the end of the world. We could write a condition of approval that says you must submit the document easement language prior to submitting your building permit application. Like you can write a condition of approval saying, basically we need to see these things, so you have to give it to us for this time. With recorded easements, if they're already recorded with the county, so technically we can just look them up. But one of the more pressing things would be like the wetland delineation. There isn't a wetland delineation on the property. We can't just like go make assumptions on vegetation corridor without a wetland delineation. So they have to do a wetland delineation. So condition of approval would potentially be a wetland delineation is required prior to submitting anything. The problem with an application like this, not including a wetland delineation, is we can't tell what the impacts to VCO are at all without it. And the amount of mitigation and you try to really catch all condition of approval for the whole VCO chapter, because you don't know what standards of the chapter are even going to apply, because you can't do any sort of assessment for it. So when they don't include the wetland delineations, that makes it really difficult to write catch-all conditions of approval that cover you for every single potential outcome of what the wetland delineation would say.
So what is our next? Glenn?
Move with,
I don't know that there is a next move right now. When the staff report is finalized, it'll be sent to me because I was one of the people that provided the comments, and so I will then email it all to you. Because we submitted comments, there are appeal rights for this body. So like if you disagreed with the decision that was made, you could potentially decide to appeal that decision, which would then take it to planning commission. You'd have to have like grounds to appeal it on, which there's probably something that you could find. But you would need the grounds, and then, so we'd probably have to meet and decide if you wanted to appeal a decision or not, but.
So we need to, at this point, we just need to wait and find out what they come back with.
Yeah, what that
And then we
decision
get
is.
together and decide what we want to do about it.
Yeah, and I don't know off the top of my head the amount of days you have once a decision is made to submit an appeal, but I do know there's a deadline on the amount of time that you have to do that. I don't think it's very long.
I was just gonna say, 10 days?
I think it's 10 days.
If I remember correctly,
In 10 days, it's really gonna be a difficult thing to do
It's quick.
because convene all of you to then make that decision. So it's just a really quick turnaround.
Well, as long as it's not Christmas Day.
I mean, is it possible to make a motion ahead of time for us to should such like programming, like should this happen, we give permission to the chair to, on the committee's behalf, as long as it passes a vote, you know, that way it moves a little bit quicker, if that's the case?
the only thing I would say, it would have to be based on specific criteria.
Yeah,
Sure.
So the committee would have to say, okay, we disagree with the VCO position, or the
Because
right
of this,
period,
this,
or,
this, yeah.
you know, the, whatever it is,
Sure.
and I guess take that, rather than
It's true.
a response.
Sure. I hear you.
What is the timeline they're working with? Do you know
45.
how soon they may be coming back?
yeah, so this was also another part of our internal conversations, that we realized that the city of Troutdale does things a little bit differently than other cities do. So we have created in our, in chapter 2, it lays out all the procedures for how to do land use applications. And we have created this sort of expedited timeline for type 2 reviews, where we say it won't take more than 45 days. The state allows us to take 120 days. We have not built into our review process a way for someone to resubmit once an application has started. So like, we know there's things missing from this application. There isn't a way in our system, because of the 45 days, for us to say, you didn't go back to the applicant and say, you didn't include these things, thus we can't, like, currently we're gonna deny you if we don't get these things. You have X amount of days to resubmit your application within this timeline, and then we'll continue reviewing it. Hillsborough does have that built in, so they can continue to resubmit. We do our check for completeness, we have a 30-day completeness review, and so that's when we're looking for those things. But there's not like a that has its own resubmittal process. but the only person doing that check is the planner. So if Public Works is saying, I can't do my review because you didn't include a stormwater management, proposal, there's no way for them to come back and like resubmit under that same application. We would have to either deny them or approve them with conditions. Tanny?
Why would you just then not deem the application complete?
Right, so it puts a lot of weight on the completeness process. And speaking from being a previous planner at the city, I learned over time how important the completeness review was. I know when I first initially started, it was like, okay, does it check the boxes? Looks good, now let's review. I've now since realized that because of the way we've built it, you essentially as a planner need to be thoroughly reviewing every single submittal during the completeness review in order to deem something complete, because we don't have this other resubmittal process. It's not a horrible thing, it just puts more weight on the completeness review instead of putting it in the like actual review timeline. So there's multiple different ways that you could do it, but it's one of those things that we've realized that it is a little bit more confusing and complicated to like go back to the applicant and say, these things are missing, can you revise your application? And so then it's getting confusing for you all because you don't know like what standards are not being met, what could you appeal, what could the appeal be based on, things like that, if you did want to appeal. I think there was more of a question in there that I forgot to answer.
So we don't know a date definite.
I don't know a definite date. That was your question.
Yeah.
What is the date? So I don't know. I can try to quickly look up at least hypothetically when the due date is.
I mean, it seems to me that we're probably getting close to the end of 45 days, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 45 days is a solid amount of time to do a review. Like that is a perfectly fine amount of time to do a review, so long as you don't have to do any resubmitting. So we've put all the emphasis on making sure the completeness is really well done. Mm-hmm. The only problem with that is that, again, it's just the planner who's doing that completeness review. So it might not have everything Multnomah County needs for the right of way, or what Public Works needs for stormwater, or what Department of State Lands needs for wetlands. So that's the only problem with that. I want to look at their notice of application. Okay, so the notice of decision on this application will be no later than Friday, November 17th. So next Friday is the latest day that they'll have a decision.
Oh, November 17th, okay.
Yeah.
2 months from the last time we, yeah.
That doesn't mean that he won't get, I mean, he could do it on Monday or Tuesday. Doesn't mean that that's the actual definitive date that it's going to happen on.
But he can't do it on the 18th.
He can't do it on the 18th.
Right, yeah, 17th. So then potentially 27th. The business days.
It's Monday.
I would have to check the definitions of chapter 2, because in chapter 2 we do state whether, when we say days, we mean business. It's like there's a threshold. If it's below a certain amount, it means business days. If it's above a certain amount, it's not business days.
Right. Okay.
So like the 120 days includes the weekends, but
And I thought 30 did too.
like
but the
30
shorter
or
ones
less
were
is,
business days, I
yeah.
think.
So there's a threshold in there. And yes, it is 10 days for the appeal.
So potentially by the 27th, we would have to appeal it.
Yeah.
Or we may need to have an emergency meeting week after next.
Well, that's Thanksgiving week.
I
And
don't care. Let's all get together for Thanksgiving dinner and just.
Why not? Your house, right?
I would say that the city doesn't normally deny things. We have a tendency to approve with conditions on applications, and then we write conditions of approval that are supposed to capture meeting all these other things. That, you know, you could write a million different conditions of approval for all the many different things that you would want to see. However, you've still then given someone approval to do something without having already seen those documents.
But if they don't provide them, they don't get approval.
Right, and their approval expires after, I think, 2 years. So, and that means that they have to do those things within that time too. It's not like they get to hold on to this approval and then 3 years down the road, submit, you know, a wetland delineation and try to bring it back up. It's expired at that point.
Marley, I have a question that goes back to the very beginning when this property was put up for sale. So when the RV park decided to sell this parcel of land, did they go to the city to get approval for the 4 plots, or was that done when the new owner came in and bought the parcel?
Those lots have been subdivided for a while. I don't know what the previous case file number is for that subdivision, but it was the RV park owner who subdivided those lots prior to selling it.
Okay, then the city approved that use.
So the city would have approved the subdivision for the 4 lots whenever they applied.
And I'm guessing that they did that because that would be more tempting to purchase something where you could pretty much pack it in. Because that's what they're doing, in my opinion.
One of the things we talked about at the last meeting was our minimum and maximum density standards and how the way that those are written, which they're also required to be written a specific way per state and metro. We have minimum density standards, so we basically prescribed what housing would look like on that property if you're going to divide it up, and you have to have this minimum number of lots. And a lot of times the minimum number of lots can feel like more than what some people want on the land. So like if those 4 lots were 1 lot, you wouldn't necessarily be able to just have 1 house.
And that's what, is that the state, the county, or the city that decides the density of the land?
It is the city
State, right?
and metro and the state.
Part of the housing bill?
No,
In a
it's,
sense?
There's a minimum and a maximum that you have to meet.
yeah,
And these decisions come from outside the city of Troutdale?
Right. So like, let's say you want to put in 4 lots that are 10,000 feet each, as an example, and 1 house on each lot, that would be a no.
right.
Because you have to build to at least 80% of the maximum.
Yeah.
That can go on it.
And I'm pretty sure a lot of that comes out of the state law for the urban growth boundaries. So since we're within an urban growth boundary, there's a presumed level of density on all of the parcels within the city. So that's why you can have county lots that are, 1 acre or 5 acres or 10 acres, but you wouldn't see 1 house on a 10-acre lot in Troutdale because it's within the urban growth boundary.
Okay, so playing devil's advocate, I bought 4 lots that the city approved. Can the city really turn me down?
On use
building?
alone, no, because
Right.
this is an allowed use
Right.
in that zoning district. On other standards, such as not meeting the vegetation corridor, for floodplain, for,
Riparian.
yeah, it would have to be on other standards. The
Right,
use is
yeah.
an allowed use in that zoning district. So on use alone, no, we would not be able to deny that application because of use. That's why the town center plan is all preferred uses and not like required uses.
Right, yeah. I'm just trying to think what recourse
Yeah,
the buyer has, having bought those lots.
right, and that's sort of, this is sort of what we talked about, and I think what Jeff was getting at with the fact that the city already approved a subdivision, the subdividing of these lots.
Right.
Into four, what was one lot into 4 lots, however many years ago. Again, I don't know the previous case file. I'd have to do some digging to find that. But you know, it sort of set it up to be sold to be housing because of the way that we already approved a subdivision for it.
Right.
I don't ever recall reviewing that subdivision application, so I'm pretty sure it was prior to my time in the city and thus prior to our existing town center plan with our existing preferred uses. So it would have been something, you know, had, let's say, a property across the street is the exact same size and someone comes in to apply for a 4-lot subdivision, we would say, you know, well, just so you know, like, these are the preferred uses of the town center plan and what we would prefer to see on this site, you know, and try to basically see if they would be willing to consider other types of uses versus what they're proposing. But it wouldn't, again, be something we could deny an application on because it's an approved use.
You know, I thought it was interesting too, that part of that property is in the floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
So could be an issue at some time in the future.
Yeah, and with the, as I mentioned, there's a separate floodplain application, and I know that currently the city does not have a floodplain manager on staff, so we contract that position. And the floodplain manager has asked for details on one of the patios that's identified on the plan because it's shown as a covered patio, and a covered patio cannot be in the floodplain, but an uncovered patio can be in the floodplain. But that's what they're looking at. So I think that the buildings largely are outside of the floodplain. There's only like a corner of this patio that is shown in the floodplain. So the backyards are all in the floodplain, but not necessarily any of the structures. And the floodplain standards are really concerned with structures. They're not concerned with, like, you know, backyards.
In the first level, I think it's just a garage, correct? Garage and then 2 stories above the garage, so 3-story tall.
I'd have to look again a little bit more closely. I don't recall. But the VECO standards, the vegetation corridor standards, you know, we require a wetland delineation for that. And so we then require a buffer off of wetlands. The vegetation corridor requires 50 feet buffers off of delineated wetlands. So if there are delineated wetlands on the site, there would be a larger buffer on top of that. The other thing about the floodplain application is that it's showing all of the stormwater occurring within what's the floodplain. And I think there's some view on whether that's allowed or not.
You're building a swale in the
The floodplain, yeah, in the buffer. So again, without the wetland delineation and without the necessary documents for the vegetation corridor standards, there's not really much you can review unless you want to quote the entire code and put a condition of approval for every single standard, or a catch-all that says you must meet all these standards, but then still you're approving it without having reviewed those standards because they haven't submitted anything.
weekends are included in the 10 days.
Yeah,
Weekend
so
threshold
weekends
is
are
7.
included in the 10 days for the appeal process.
They're included. The
And
threshold
holidays?
is 7. Yeah.
Holidays.
Does it say anything about filing an appeal? Do you have to, when you file an appeal, do you have to state the specific code standards that you're appealing upon?
I'll look and see here. I don't know that we require that. I think you have to cite the criteria.
Okay, so yeah, that would be the code standards.
Maybe we can file a notice of appeal and then have 10 days to put it together.
I mean, possibly.
Yeah.
What is there, if this is approved, are you guys leaning towards appealing it or not appealing it? Like, what is the general consensus of the committee? If there is a consensus.
I know we aren't able to appeal on certain terms themselves, so I think if there's reason found after the application is done, then I would want to appeal it, for sure.
I was gonna say it depends on the terms of approval.
Yeah, I think that's like the politically correct response when it comes down to it. I like outside of any opinion on what I think should go there. I mean, realistically, it depends on what requirements are met and not. If there's anything in question, then I would say, yeah, we would want to appeal that, especially since you're saying, I mean, if it's technically approved, provided all these conditions, if anything, that leaves too much a chance.
Yeah, so it's dependent upon whatever the conditions of approval are.
And if they meet all the terms.
Yeah, and one of the things I will note, I was mentioning earlier about how we don't have this, we don't have a way to ask someone to resubmit within the process. And so I was taking a look at the Public Works comments, because I can see all the comments because I'm on the same folders. But I was taking a look to see what Public Works had said, because normally they'll say approve with conditions. We honestly almost never have denials, so I don't think I've ever seen them write we recommend denial, but they could say we recommend denial. And they had put, it is the recommendation of the Public Works Department that the decision be continued and the application be remanded back to the applicant to address, at least conceptually, the provision of water and sewer services to the proposed townhomes in the application. So basically what they're saying is they want the applicant to have to resubmit something. So that's part of the reason why I brought that up, is just in you're not there's multiple people who are wanting more within the application that isn't currently there. And so we don't have this process that Public Works is referencing.
Right, so I would say at that point, I know that the applicant can voluntarily extend the clock.
Yeah, so the standards that we have for extending the clock are for type 3s. They're during public hearings. They're not actually during the type 2 procedures. We, Dakota and myself, did a deep dive into chapter 2, and we were like, okay, this is not during a public hearing. So those standards that are written about extending, pressing pause essentially and going back to the drawing board, those are all for during a public hearing process and not during a type 2 application. And so that's why I was saying, since we've created this 45-day hard deadline on type 2 applications, we have nothing built into that review process to ask them to resubmit, because we don't have any time.
So as of right now, then it means it would essentially could be denied after that 45-day period, and they would have to submit an entirely new application, ideally including everything else, right? Okay.
So given that we don't have this process that Public Works is recommending,
Sure, yeah.
and we've recommended denial because they can't resubmit these things.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I don't know that I would say I'm hoping, I'm anticipating that the result is denying and then asking them to resubmit with all these additional information.
And we requested that to be a type 3 going forward.
And we
if they
have made a request that it be type 3. That would be something that the community development director would ultimately be deciding on, though, because none of the actual applications that they're applying for are type 3 applications. So the community development director would have to decide that the impact to the neighbors and the potential response from the neighbors is great enough that it warrants having a public hearing. Because another thing that I put in my comments was how we had members of the public at our meeting. However, because it was not a formal public hearing, we didn't determine whether they were proponents, or neutral parties.
Right.
So
I did get the impression that they would round up all the residents of the neighboring property to come in and leave public comment if that's the case, but.
right,
I
which,
hear you.
but I couldn't
Right.
say, they were against, I could only say, this wasn't the forum for, they came to listen into the conversation, but it really wasn't the forum for them to be able to provide public testimony to the application.
And wasn't he concerned, if I remember correctly, about the easement and about the traffic that would happen?
That's his company that has the easement.
Yeah, and that was there were 2 members who lived there, and then, well, I think that the guy who works there also lives there. But yeah, the common denominator is that this was all property owned by the RV park and sold by the RV park, and the RV park does not have public, didn't have comment on this, so.
And the manager of the RV park was on vacation, so that's why the gentleman was here. He's just filling in, so. He says, I wasn't the property owner. Your tenant.
Marley, could the owner of that property make a decision to do something different other than housing and do something commercial? They could do this, a multi-use, right?
Yes, the zoning district was mixed use 2, I think.
MU2.
MU2, general mixed use 2.
So mixed use is an approved use.
There's
You're
other-
talking about density though, right? With I guess pertaining to housing. What if they built a building that was an art studio that employed 4 or 5 people? That really doesn't have anything to do with density, right? Because it's a commercial business now.
Right. If there was no one living there, if it was
Okay.
live workspace.
That would change the.
Yeah, you could put in so if it would be considered mixed use if it was a live workspace where the ground floor is an art studio, but the upstairs is living space for artists.
Okay.
And that's actually one of the uses that the town center overlay calls out as sees occurring in downtown, or would like to see occurring in downtown too.
And I remember that conversation many years ago when Rip came, talking about having that multi-use where artists would live on top and they'd have their shops down below.
Right. One of the challenges you get into with that is then you have trip generation and traffic, because you've got more people going in and out of there than what it's designed for.
Yeah, and I believe that I think it's 1 parking space per unit is required in that instance. There's public parking across the street at Glen Otto Park. So the public could park at Glen Otto Park.
But
You don't have to go to the park to park at Glen Otto Park.
But I can park one car.
Right.
Where does the rest of my family park? Because they can't park in that right away.
So
There's
if
just
it,
not enough parking.
like in this hypothetical,
Right.
in this hypothetical scenario that's not happening, we would require 1 parking space per unit. So there would be 4 parking spaces, whether that be a garage or act like a surface lot space on the site, because that would be what we would require. They could build more than that, but they couldn't build less than that. And we have a cap on the amount more that they could build.
But the plans that they had were
The garage
4
is
units.
Yeah.
single car garages, right?
with driveways.
Right.
That's 2 spaces per unit.
I can see two.
You made 3 or 4 bedroom house.
So I was
And then
just
have
saying
common
that
town.
if it were like an art studio on the ground floor with living space above, the guests of the art studio, like anyone coming to shop or something, could park at the public parking available across the street at Glen Auto Park, so long as the gate wasn't closed.
That would work much better than resident parking. I don't think there's enough resident parking
We don't need it anymore.
on that street.
We just take their car.
We're gonna have a
We got
tram
the cars
service.
to drop us off and go somewhere else every minute and
We'll have a tram service.
a half.
So yeah, they could decide they want
Yeah, I'm
to
just
change
putting
the
myself in the
application.
shoes of the owner of the property.
Mhm.
Construction company, they bought it because they're gonna build, and they know why they bought it. Because it was sold as a 4-plot piece of land,
Mhm.
and if he gets denied, then that could be
Mhm.
litigation with the city or something, because,
So that was my question a while ago, was,
Right.
you know, he bought the property, it was divided,
right,
he bought it in good faith.
right.
Yeah, and like live work, so like a live work unit could be a really good use for that site that meets the development code, meets the preferred uses, and
Kind of sticks with the flavor of
Yeah.
that area, you know,
Right.
the art
It does.
district.
right, yes.
Are you saying what he would do because he would get denied, you mean?
Yeah, if he was doing everything that he thought he could do because he bought the land, knowing that he could build, he had 4 parcels to build on,
Mhm.
and he keeps getting denied by the city for trying to build on parcels, then he could possibly sue the city.
It doesn't give you like free reign to do whatever you want just because you buy the land, though.
I understand that, but, if he keeps getting denied and denied and denied,
Well, he could get denied, let's say, based on the riparian area or the slope district or something of that nature, which frankly, he wouldn't have any grounds to appeal because there's separate standards that he has to meet for that, whether he has a lot or not.
Yeah,
So when the city approved the 4 parcels on that land, which they did when it was owned by the RV park, correct?
Yes.
Then the city knew that Beaver Creek and the vegetation corridor, all that was within that distance to allow those there. So now we're coming back later to say, hey, let's reaffirm what we knew years ago, right?
And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a condition of approval on the original subdivision that said, you know, any future development must meet the vegetation corridor standards. must
Because that can
meet the flood,
change.
You know, yeah,
We already
exactly.
know the banks are collapsing on
Right,
that
so
one
like,
side.
and that's another reason why the vegetation corridor doesn't say, like, this is the exact boundary of the vegetation corridor, and this is what it is for forever, and you must meet these standards. It's every application that is potentially impacting the vegetation corridor has to assess where that vegetation corridor is. So that's why it's not like we get a map from, you know, Metro or the state, and that's what we use. It can change for those very reasons.
Or if we get a flood condition, the Beaver Creek can change its meandering and make a whole new landscape.
I own 2 lots on Walters Hill in Gresham. It would cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars to build on them because of the Gresham's overlays and everything on those. Slide, shifting. I could build on them if I spend enough money.
Yep. Get your return. On a big project. All right.
Any other questions on that? Just stay tuned
We
for the
just kinda
decision, I
wait.
guess.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah.
All right. So the next item that we were going to discuss was the TCAB organizational structure. So in your packet, you can see the ordinance number 876, which established the Town Center Advisory Board. And gave it, what's the right word? Charged it with certain tasks. So appendix or attachment A is the next couple of pages of that. Talks about how, who comprises all the committee and how do we determine this, but also that you're to provide feedback or testimony on certain land use applications that occur within the identified opportunity sites and for capital projects that occur along identified opportunity corridors, and then other duties as assigned by the city council. So recent other duty that you guys all worked on was the urban renewal area RFQ process, and making a recommendation to the urban renewal agency regarding that.
This is Zach, are we kind of discussing this again in light of like our last meeting's discussion about the possibility of expanding responsibility to be more encompassing within the town center zone?
Yeah, so at the last meeting, Tanny had brought up possibly wanting to, request amending some of this or modifying some of this, and so we had said that we could put it on the agenda to discuss at the next meeting. So if anyone has any feelings one way or another, we can sort of talk through those.
Well, if I remember correctly, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. One of the things that I think that was suggested towards the end of the last meeting was simply making the amendment from limiting the scope to the opportunity zones and corridors and changing it to basically everything that's covered town center overlay.
Yeah, to kind of jump on what Adrian said, I think it would be helpful to maybe understand the current process, because I think some of the frustration, or not frustration, but the concern stemmed from the recent, I guess, like renovations right across the street here, just right downtown, not really knowing anything or having a say in anything as, a previous town center member. This is my understanding. So I guess maybe it'd be helpful to understand, I guess, what the current process is for, like how that currently goes and how this gets approved, generally speaking, maybe, so we kind of know where our scope lies as far as being able to step in and be a voice.
Yeah, I think this comes back to a lot of what our conversation was, even on the previous discussion item, where I was explaining sort of how type 2 applications don't get posted physically, and only property owners within 250 feet are notified, and then review agencies for comments. Right now, the only thing that we review is something that is one of those opportunity sites, something that occurs within one of those opportunity sites. The town center overlay is larger. It is pretty encompassing of, just wondering if it's on any of those maps over there. It goes basically from the edge of Edgefield So where the red and yellow properties are, other side of Edgefield, it does not include Edgefield.
Yeah, so the town center overlay is this blue dotted line here that goes.
Yeah, except that map is old because, oh, no, wait, no, that one's correct, yeah, so yes.
Okay.
So there's a lot of properties that aren't opportunity sites that are within the town center overlay. Requesting to review all of those applications would be a lot of work. Potentially, it depends on how many applications we receive within the town center at any given point. It could be not a lot, it could be nothing, or it could be tons of different things. It really just depends. Right now, you know, we have our set of review entities who comment, like who the application is routed to for comments. It would be a type 2 procedure for site development review. Not everything requires site development review. So like a new, like let's say a business wanted to go into the general store. That doesn't necessarily mean that site development review would be required because it's an existing commercial business. If they're not changing the exterior, the facade, things like that, then it wouldn't be potentially a land use application.
Right.
There would be something to even review in the first place. A lot of times with existing buildings, it can just be a change of use, which is a building review.
Okay.
But with the type of business, do we have any say so as the type of business that went in?
If it's a conditional use, the planning commission would have a say.
Right.
So,
Only.
yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of different types of conditional uses. Like, let's say someone wanted to convert all of the old general store into housing. That wouldn't be an allowed use. It could potentially be a conditional use. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just using that as an example. That would be something that would then go to planning commission.
But other uses are
But there's
currently approved right now.
right, I mean, there's lots of uses that, I would say that our use chart is very broad. It'll say retail up to 5,000 square feet. It'll say commercial uses, community service uses, parks and open spaces, but it's not like disc golf courses and dog parks. It's like, it leaves it more broad. So it's not like women's boutique stores and home goods stores. It just says retail up to a certain square footage. So there's a whole slew of uses that are allowed just out of the generalness of the code, the broad generalness of the code.
And that's intentional.
Yeah.
But the limitation is the parking.
Yeah, so
To
there
what
isn't,
businesses
so
can
right
get.
now, everything in the central business district, commercial uses do not require parking. You don't have to add parking for commercial uses within the town center because it's presumed that there's enough public parking with on-street parking and public parking lots. So,
I like the presumption because there is no parking.
so, well, that is what the standards say. So, so it doesn't matter if it was a retail store or a restaurant, they're both commercial uses and thus no parking is required. Any other questions on like procedure?
Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Yeah, well, yeah, what I wanted to talk about was the work that the town center committee did and that process of going to council and what the understanding was of that group compared to the resolution that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a bit of a disconnect there. So what I did was I went back through the work that committee did, and I highlighted some things that I thought were I guess I would say pertinent to the discussion. One example would be, if you look at the bullet points on the first page, the second one is empower TCAB. Okay? And this is the language that we had suggested, and what we have is, in reality, empower TCAB to provide feedback on community design. This includes for public sector investments and private property development during a land use application process. A little different. And then when we talk about, next one I'd like to go to is A2, which is create permanent town center alliance board. Okay, and you know, I'm not gonna do that one. Okay, so, okay, A3, this is one I was concerned with, was, when we look at this, TCAB would be tasked with providing written comments, testimony on certain types of land use applications on private and public property or capital improvement plans within the town center district. Comments or testimony could allow for conditions of approval to be placed on an application that impact the design of a site or structure so that it is reviewed through the prism of the town center vision. Although providing comments testimony will not result in a legally binding decision, the board would obtain appeal rights with a land use decision they might disagree with. This responsibility could evolve into a future design review committee or further codifying design standards. Now, this doesn't talk at all about opportunity sites. Public and private and capital, but it doesn't say we're strictly looking at opportunity sites, we're not looking at the confluence, things of that nature.
It just says certain types of land use applications, so it's not specific on which types of land use applications.
Right.
It is kind of similar language to item D on that attachment A, but you're right, it does not say opportunity sites or opportunity corridors.
Specifically. And, you know, you look, the urban renewal has been excluded. And if you go to the ones that's labeled 173 in your packet, allow for TCAB the ability to hold public hearings and make recommendations of development proposals at the confluence site.
Is this not what we just did?
But you've excluded the confluence. You exclude a review specifically.
Right, but this, for the hold public meetings, we did that and make recommendations of development proposals. I mean, I guess it was more of the qualifications, but so you would just want to continue that review further into that process.
And I think that was what the committee, help me out here, guys, am I wrong?
No, I mean, that was spot on.
And that's why I just think there's a little bit of a you know, you go to the last page and you look at the second paragraph. As the expected successor organization to the Town Center Committee, it's important that TCAB can adequately review and take comment on development proposals on the Confluence site.
Where are you at?
Last page, 175. And the reason I bring that up was one of the big things that group was concerned about was the Confluence site. Being involved in how that was going to develop.
I do think that, I mean, the work that we did last year in selecting, you know, making a recommendation meets what this is calling for, you know, that was, I mean, recommendations of development proposals, we reworded it to be qualifications just because we didn't want to do an RFP for other reasons. But I do think it met those standards. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if I wasn't part of the process of creating TCAB and like writing this language necessarily. I think that the Urban Renewal Agency intends to include TCAB in the process, like in the future process of the urban renewal area. They just didn't specify it on paper. They said other duties as assigned. So I don't know if that means, do we go back to them every time there's something that we need to review, or do we ask them to be more specific with regards to the urban renewal area? I'm not sure.
I'm not either, and I'm not attacking the Urban Renewal Agency Board or the City Council saying that, you know, we weren't included in that process. But what I get concerned is when I look at Ordinance 876, the board is unable to provide feedback or testimony on certain land use applications that occur within identified opportunity sites and for capital projects that occur along identified opportunity corridors. That's it.
So what you want?
And so that, to me, is a significant wholesale change. Because I don't remember the committee ever having that discussion that it was just going to be opportunity sites and corridors. It was going to be the town center and the confluence. And I just feel that that group, their heads would completely spin off if they knew that they were not going to be involved, possibly would not be involved in confluence. Because that was going to be a deal breaker.
So would you say, does adding, if it said that occur within identified opportunity sites and the urban renewal area, would that sufficiently meet what the intent of the town center plan, or does it need to be more broad? I'm just worried that if we open it up to every single application that occurs in the town center plan, it's going to result in a lot more work for the committee.
I would agree. I don't think it should be every application. I think there needs to be some, and we found that out the last meeting, there needs to be some hard, definite criteria. These things are reviewed by TCAP, these things are not. And they review these applications, they don't review these, have a nice day. But I think that Ordinance 876 needs to be revisited, because if this is really the direction the council wants to go, and I'm just going to say this group is just a box checker. This group is just, yep, community looked at it, ching, even though they had no authority, no ability to comment, no nothing. It's just like, yep, you did it. And I think if the council's doing that, I think it's very poor decorum on their part. To have a committee limit their ability, if they did that, limit their ability just so you can say, look at this, the committee looked at it.
So it's,
They looked at it, but they couldn't touch it, you know, couldn't.
yeah, I
So I
think
guess
that,
the questions I would have is, what really is the intent? Is the intent to involve more community members in the process? Or is the intent to have a formal process where certain things kind of come by the group and nothing comes out of that? Sorry, I know I'm sounding like we could be wasting our time, and I don't feel that way, but I don't want to feel that way. And I think that, you know, if we're reviewing things, we should be reviewing things that fit a particular scope, whether they're on an opportunity site or not. And I would think that the council would want that feedback, but maybe they don't. Because this is different than what the group agreed to.
well, so, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know that, I mean, council's not reviewing every application that comes through for the town, you know, like, they're not necessarily reviewing those, so,
But
I think there's what appears to me is that there's two separate things. There's the urban renewal area, the confluence, and having a say on what happens there, and then there's this larger, what is our role within the overall town center advisory board, and is this a committee or is this a commission? Because it kind of sounds like if you want to have more authority to have a decision-making ability, it would need to be a commission, like Planning Commission or Historic Landmarks Commission, and not a committee providing just like comments on an application.
and I would disagree, because to me, it's a difference between ability and authority. The authority to do an action is a commission. The ability to comment would be a committee's work.
So are you wanting to expand the ability to just include the urban renewal area, or are you thinking greater than just the urban renewal area?
Me personally, I think that group was told it was going to be more than just the urban renewal area
I was gonna say greater.
and more than opportunity sites. I don't remember it ever being limited to opportunity sites. Sorry,
I think it needs to be the total town center
Right.
area.
And one of the things, I understand the difference between the urban renewal area and the town center, but it's all part of the town center. And that was all deliberately wrapped together as a package.
Is it every application type? So is it type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, or is it just
Heavens no.
type 3s and type 4s?
That's
Because
just
if it's
me
every
speaking.
type, if it's every type 1, you're getting every sign.
And that's where I think, and I'm not trying to speak for anybody here, I'm just speaking for myself. That's where I think it needs to be definite criteria. They look at these things in this scope, and they don't look at these things. But I think to say, you know, we're gonna build 7-story buildings, okay? And if it doesn't happen to be on an opportunity site, you can't comment on it, I think is wrong.
That would be a type 3 application that's reviewed by Planning Commission.
But you said I was saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying that.
I think that's disingenuous to the committee and their work. They should have that ability on certain applications.
So what if it was that the TCAB was notified of all applications within the town center overlay? So a notification, like the same notifications that we do, you know, the notice of land use application for any land use application other than type 1s.
Okay, so not type 1s.
Not type 1s.
Okay.
I don't think we do notice of land use applications for type 1s because, well,
So 2s and 3s.
2s and 3s and 4s.
And then we could then move to meet about certain ones that we feel we should. Is that what you're getting at, Danny?
That's where I would go, is you would have criteria. So some things you would review, some things you wouldn't. But you'd say, okay, based on this, we would comment on design or, whatever. We would comment on these things. And we're like, well, this looks more like a spaceship than 19th century architect, whatever. And so we should meet and discuss this. I don't know.
Yeah, so we would have to create criteria that would
Right.
then,
And we don't have that now.
we
but
don't
I
have it
just-
right now, but right.
I kind of feel like this is having a couple of limbs sheared off.
Because it's limiting the scope of your review to just opportunity sites when the town center plan is broader than just opportunity sites.
Correct.
Opportunity sites is only a
Correct.
limited portion of what the town center plan
Right.
discussed and talked about. So the first step would be making sure any application that's within the town center overlay is sent, like you are notified of those applications.
Along with the, public that you notified generally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the review entities and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah.
And there's nothing saying that you as the general public can't, as an individual member of the public, once receiving a notification, you could make comments, provide public testimony.
It's true.
This we put on our agenda, post on the city's website, and then the public could see that and start filling these chairs at city council. I mean, that's what I could see come out of that, is to make the public aware of what's going on. Right? If we want to review things that we're not normally reviewing now, we want to put it on our next agenda, and people look, oh, this is on the agenda, I'll live right down the street from there, I want to see what's going on. And then here, all those chairs are filled, and then when city council has a meeting to talk about it, all those chairs are filled and there's lines going out to the parking lot. Because that's when the city council, I think, pays attention, is when the public's there.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of sad. Because one problem you have is when things get to city council, the train's running at warp 5 already. And it's really hard to shut anything down and do anything about it at that point. It's always easier to get to it when we're 1/4 impulse power, and we can say, wait a minute, we don't really think this is gonna work, and so we try to fix it. But it also is just an opportunity for the public to comment if they want to, if they feel impacted, if they feel led to comment, they can come in and say, hey, I don't really like this, just like the folks did last month.
Right.
I think the one thing with that we have to be mindful of, though, is that this is not a public hearing, and it wasn't done in a public hearing procedure. So they might provide comment here, but that didn't automatically give them appeal rights because they didn't provide it during a public hearing. So if they still wanted the ability to potentially appeal an application, they would have to provide written testimony during the public comment period. And that's where convening this group in time to meet the whole public comment period is difficult. So like we met on the 17th and public comments were due on the 18th on the last application. And so, a member of the public would have a day. We had a day to submit comments. So that's one of those things that, it's good that we would have an opportunity for the public to attend and maybe learn more about the application, but we don't want to confuse them into thinking that this is a public hearing procedure and that that substitutes for written testimony. So we wouldn't want to deceive the public in any way.
But it makes them aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
which in turn they can attend a city council meeting. whereas maybe they wouldn't have attended because they had no idea.
Yeah, and then, but when they're at a city council meeting, if they were to like, let's say one of those members of the public wanted to go to the next city council meeting and bring up this application, they would be bringing it up during the non-agenda items. And that doesn't necessarily spur conversation with council, you know, like it's just bringing it to their attention, but it's not resulting in like anything happening necessarily. It's just bringing it up. So that's why, you know, public hearings, like at planning commission, it's nice when there's a public hearing because that can actually influence the decision-making process. And it's like a more proper outlet for expressing that public comment. So if this were a commission versus a committee, you could potentially have public hearings associated with reviews. I'm not necessarily recommending that that's what we do. I'm just saying that would be the difference. That said, I do think that, and this is probably more of a topic of conversation for planning commission than it is for TCAB, but back to my earlier point about how we don't post notices for type 2 applications, and there's a lot of applications that are type 2 applications. What I've witnessed in the past couple of years has appeared to be a lot of people not aware of what's going on development-wise within the city, and then feeling like it's too late or they didn't have the opportunity to be aware during the process when it counted, and feeling like we can't change it now because, or, you know, we can't have any influence on this decision now because it's already been decided. We found out too late for us to have any sort of impact. And it's not necessarily that people are mad about what's happening, it's that they're mad about the lack of awareness of what's going on within the community. And so I am a really big proponent of us being more communicative about what development proposals are occurring within the city. So having those physical posted notices. Like I said, I've never received a mailed notice from the city of Portland about an application, but I know what development proposals are going on in my neighborhood because I can see the posted notices. So I just think that that's something that we might want to reconsider, or planning commission might want to ask staff or the future community development director to consider either changing the development code or just simply implementing as an operating procedure to help keep everyone more informed. Because I think that that's where a lot of tension is stemming from, is just from a lack of awareness of what's going on until it's the ball is already rolling and it's too late.
Right. And I know that HLC feels that way all the time. And I think, like with the building down here, we didn't know what was going on until it was already happening. And so I think a lot of us kind of feel, ouch, right? So it would have been nice to know ahead of time before they were doing anything, instead of just, oh, we're doing something.
Right. And like, and as it's currently written, it's not like any procedural rules have been broken. It's just the way that our code is written. And I think
most codes.
In most codes, yeah. And it's not like this is unique to Troutdale and we're, you know, doing something special or anything, but I just think that, you know, we're following the procedure as it's written, but what we've come to learn is that the procedure isn't accurately informing the public to the best. Like, I mean, we have so many, like, mailed public notice to property owners is such a minimally inclusive way of notifying people. It's not taking into account any renters that live in the community. It's not taking into account the community members that might not live directly adjacent to that property, but that might be impacted by that property, the surrounding traffic, all sorts of other things. And so I just think that I think that there are ways that we could investigate better forms of communication with our residents, and with our community members, that could help people feel like they're more involved in what's going on in their community.
Well, and just, you know, to be clear, there's a few things that we've done is our notice area is twice what the state requires.
Mhm.
And we post signs on property, we're not required to do that. So I mean, there's some things that we try to do to help the process, but people get the news from where they get the news, and it doesn't always, connect.
Yeah, and this is this, again, probably something for planning commission and not necessarily TCAB, but a lot of you guys are on planning commission, so, or other boards or committees, but like, the way that it was written is also pre-social media and pre the maybe not the internet, but the internet the way that we currently use the internet. And when there are new development applications, that doesn't get posted to our city's website unless we know they're going to be hot topic things or special things like City Hall. We know that people want to know what's going on in City Hall, so that might get a page on the website, but not every development gets some sort of like a news update on the website or posted on social media or shared in these other ways. And or the champion, we mail the champion out to everyone. We don't put anything about development proposals in there. And so there's all these different ways that we're communicating with our public, but we're not using any of those tools to necessarily communicate about the land use applications, which are some of the things people care about the most in their community. So I think it might be something that planning commission or the new community development director might want to investigate, is how can we enhance that level of communication with the citizens.
I know it has nothing to do with TCAB. Hold on a second, yes.
Oh, I was, if we're gonna, that's okay. I was wondering if it's cool if I read a, kind of maybe like a proposed like amendment to that ordinance that we were just discussing. It may, just falling in line kind of with what we're talking about, on the section D for attachment A, if we were to read instead, the board is enabled to provide feedback or testimony on and receive notice of certain land use applications and capital projects that occur within the town center district, amended by striking out that occur within the identified opportunity sites, the word for, and along identified opportunity corridors, and replacing it with that wording. To be more encompassing, still keeping in mind a potential limited scope to the applications we'd be reviewing, so we're not bogged down by necessaries, and then I think kind of focusing in on how we feel about responsibility.
And it does say enabled, so it's not saying you must provide comment on every application. It just says that you're enabled to provide comment. So that does give you the opportunity to decide that like something isn't necessarily warranting comment.
Quick question, this is Will Knight, and I apologize if you'd already gone over this before, but that comment or proposed conditions, does that happen to happen in that certain comment period? Is that what you were saying? That the reason why we did the last one on the 17th, because it had to be on the 18th, and so we were rushed, we didn't, but now we're finding out that we didn't really have all the information to begin with to accurately comment on, so I think that's possibly a problem there. I guess, how do we still have the ability to comment on those things without even really knowing what is truly happening? Is there a way to, like you said, create some sort of, gosh, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but what is the effect there on that? As far as our comments, and what can they do with the comments? If we say, hey, we'd love to do a vegetation screen on this side, they can just say, awesome, thanks, we love your opinion, or not? Or are they having to do that? Or, what sort of authority, do we have as far as the comments go, and the importance of what those comments mean to the person who's the one that's economically doing the project, and their own pocketbook is what's best.
Yeah, so we can make proposed conditions of approval that can be reviewed by staff planning commission or city council when evaluating an application for decision. So in this instance, this is reviewed by staff. The application is reviewed by staff. Staff can decide whether or not to include our proposed condition of approval or not.
But then it also gives us appeal rights if something proceeds in a manner that we deem unacceptable given certain parameters.
Yeah, and I think one of the tricky things is that we don't have criteria that we're reviewing. Like, we're reviewing it on the broad scope of the town center plan, but we don't have criteria that we're reviewing these applications against.
Yeah.
So we're talking about these preferred land uses for the opportunity sites. But there's, you know, do we talk about do we need design criteria that we're reviewing against? Or are we supposed to be reviewing the Chapter 4 section of the Troutdale Development Code that speaks about the town center overlay district? Like, are we supposed to be doing like a review of each of those standards? Like, it doesn't really tell us what or quantify what we're reviewing applications against, other than town center plan. And the town center plan doesn't have review criteria. So we're reviewing it against a vision.
Yeah. And really no effect of what we actually do on the end result, because it may not even be included.
Right.
So I think I'm hearing your frustration in that, and that's maybe like what you're trying to say is how we strengthen that up a little bit and give this group more of an opportunity time-wise, and, you know, having the all information to dictate, you know, what our comments would be, and then hopefully having a little more teeth into what the comments actually get as far as conditions of approval down the road.
Yeah, and what we look at.
Right.
So, you know, we're not going to be looking at riparian areas and
Right.
some of these things. That's going to be out of our scope. Somebody else is going to handle that. But we would like to, I would suggest we design some criteria, and it's like, we are going to look at these things on these types of applications and then make comments on them.
And then if I may, with that timeline, I'm understanding, we have to force a time to decision between a certain time, and if we don't, we just say, you know, no, denial. Is that what I mean? Is I hear that? Like, the application with the 4 houses, there was something about we just deny it if, you know, then they have to resubmit.
Well,
that thing, what,
Yeah,
I'm trying to address that point, and like why we're so like jammed into having a decision on the 17th by the 18th, and we don't even have the information.
Yeah.
You know what
So
I mean?
Chapter 2 of the development code talks a lot about the procedure.
Okay.
And that was specifically talking about how with type 2 applications, we have expedited our timeline. We've said we will give you a decision by 45 days,
Right.
whereas the
By the
state
state.
requires 120 days.
Okay.
So because we said 45 days, and it takes us 15 days to get comments back from everyone, and then, you know, maybe 15 more days to do, there is no time built in there for us to say, you are missing this information, can you resubmit this information, then we'll send it out for review a second time,
And
because we've limited it to 45 days.
that's a city self-imposed?
That's the
or a
city's imposed
okay.
timeline, yeah.
Okay.
See, this is where I was going before I went over to them. Is there something that we need to change and do away with the 45, or to allow for some of this stuff to happen?
the 45 was done specifically because Gresham was at 30. And that was really where the 45 came from, was we're trying to be competitive, more competitive in the market.
Mhm.
And it's like the timeline is great, but also too, as you know, the longer the timeline, the more costly it is to do a development, and, you know, you can create a barrier there. So you want to be careful of what you do.
So
It sounds like part of the problem with this timeline is that we don't have time to build in various aspects.
Well,
Right.
I guess I would
To go back
say,
and ask for more information.
yeah,
or-
I think it could be done. I think step one is no one knows that they need to notify us
Mhm.
right out of the gate. Okay, that would be the first thing that would help. The second thing that would help would be us knowing what we're looking at, the lens that we're looking at it through, and then what our comment, you know, procedure is. Maybe it's just like, it goes out to us, and like Zach kind of made the comment, then we look at it, we say, we should meet on this, or we should make a decision on this, or we don't. And just the fact that we get an application doesn't mean we have to comment on it.
Yeah, if we were able to create criteria, it could also be something where, like, the notification goes out for every town center application, and it's something that I might be able to review and say, okay, because we checked these 4 boxes, I know I need to convene the committee to review this application. So you'd also be notified of the application, but these things were checked, so we're meeting. And that could be, you know, it's anything you wanted it to be, really. So we would just have to figure out what that like what it is that you want to be notified on specifically. So if they're a height variance, you know, you would want to convene on any application that is a variance.
Will Knight again, and if I may, just to continue that thought, 100%, I love those 2 things, with the third one potentially being the idea of the 45 days, that if it does trigger a criteria that we would look at, that there may be some additional notice given or advance notice that, hey, this is in an opportunity zone, this is a town center, it may not hit the 45 days, we could use up to the full amount of time. That way that person knows that they're in an opportunity zone, and we're going to take the opportunity to make sure that we put in there what we want. Like somehow being able to trigger that like opportunity for this group, then once we have our vision, our scope, and our criteria, to then go through that process.
The way our code is currently written, we don't have anything built out for any sort of back and forth or, you know, revising an application or working with us. You know, like it's just not the way that it's currently written. I don't hate the way that it's written, because I like that it's really clear on dates. It's like 45 days, 30 days. This is the time. It's really clear. When you do the 120 days, you might have this middle whole back and forth waffle period that you're like, okay, resubmit within 72 days and we'll get back to you in 17, and you know, so like it could result in like an unclear timeline if we were to modify that. So I kind of feel like codifying criteria that we're asking an applicant to respond to in their application would be more effective use of everyone's time than us having this criteria but wanting to go back and forth with them on it. Like, I think if it was codified in the town center overlay in chapter 4, which is the overlay zoning districts chapter, there's a section on the town center. That section of the code could be enhanced to include different things like design standards or other requirements that we have that can come from the town center. But we would just have to determine what we wanted to put in it and then do a text amendment with planning commission and city council. But that would at least put it in the development code, and an applicant's narrative would have to respond to those sections. So we'd get a clear response from them, and we'd be telling them in advance of the application, we want you to do this with your property. Some of the things that other cities have done too have been like these like option design, like option books, or like pick your own, you know, like here are all these different things that we want. We kind of actually do it in our code a little bit in chapter 8, the design standards section. So for like single family homes, we'll have like 8 standards, and we tell them you have to have like 4 of these standards or something like that. So we could come up with a list of the design criteria that we really would like to see in development, and say, you know, commercial development must select 4 of these standards, and they would just have to tell us which 4 they're selecting. And then, you know, they still get some freedom to choose which ones they want to do, but we're saying you have to do at least some of these things. You can't just put up a blank building with no windows on one side or something. Not that they can do that right now, but
So do you find that different builders, so this guy here on this board, 4 units, I think he's a new builder, he's never built a hotel. Whereas opposed to, say, your friend over here that owns a vacant lot on Buxton or building that down here and has built numerous houses in Troutdale.
Yeah.
Does he already know what he needs to submit and?
Does the new guy know what he needs to submit?
No, well, there's an experienced builder knows better what he needs to have and can meet that 45 without a lot of back and forth, I would think, as opposed to a new guy really doesn't, he's learning what he needs to get into you guys for approval and what he does, you know.
Yeah.
That's what my question is. Does an experienced person is a lot smoother? Are they turning predominantly everything in ahead of time?
Do you want to say
Sure.
something really quick?
That depends. Some of them don't turn in anything hardly, and some of them turn in great work. So it's kind of like anything. But the 45 is our timeline. So we kind of stamp this thing and we say it's good, and the clock starts going. And I think the problem that we're seeing with this is, where's number 3?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have number 3, we start at the clock. And once you start the clock, you can't stop the clock.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need a better system in place for staff to say, okay, I've actually got everything, now I can start the clock.
Mm-hmm. And like the pre-applications are supposed to help inform applicants of what they need to submit and what they need to do. So we always encourage people to do pre-applications. They're only required for type 3 applications and above. But we try to encourage pre-applications on everything, because then they get these preliminary comments from all these people who are going to make formal comments during the application. And they're saying, you need to do a traffic study. You need to do a wetland delineation. You need to do such and such. There was a pre-application on this. The applicant did know he needed all these things.
So he knew ahead of time what he needed. He still.
He is, from what I understand, not as experienced of a developer. I think the architect is now the one who's communicating with city staff.
Right.
That's pretty common, that the architects, people don't like to pay their architects to do the project management side of things, but we would love it if they did it more frequently, because a lot of times you lay people doing project management who don't know what they're supposed to be doing or what they're talking about. Very frequently happens.
I knew him from his past life. He used to run the daycare center here.
I don't know him, and I've had no conversations, so.
That one? Yeah, that was his mom, and then he took it over.
Will?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff here, and I feel like inclined to agree with a lot of it. And I think maybe to kind of put some bullet points on some things I've heard, and maybe a list of things to kind of work on for the next meeting or whatnot, in the interest of time and brevity. Yeah, I think notification to TCAB would be something that's very reasonable for us to ask for. Immediate notification, build that in right off the bat when those are submitted, or however that timeline works. I love the idea of strengthening the language of 876 in this document to include town center, and maybe even adding that notification note in there, and any of the things that we think we want to include. I love working on that language, and maybe a couple guys smarter than me, like Tanny and Zach, might be able to work on some different language that might be appropriate for that. And then also working on adding the criteria, to the code that would then, give us that lens and things that we're already looking for, and then work on design standards. I think those would be all amazing goals for this group to accomplish if you're all in agreement.
Yeah, 100%. Good work session for laying those out would be good work for sure.
With the criteria and the design standards, do you think that that is something we need to hire a consultant to help us evaluate, or is it something that like internally you think that we can do? Tanny has an opinion.
Well, I think we can do it. I think we sit down with what we've got existing, right? Do a work session.
Mhm.
And then write out what we want to do for criteria.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we pulled criteria
Existing
or
code.
design standards from other communities
Mhm.
who might have standards that we want to emulate or copy, or DLCD usually has, like, you know, code language for specific things. That'd be helpful. I don't want to rewrite things
Yeah.
if we don't have to.
Totally.
You don't like LCDC?
I didn't say anything.
That will look on your face. Maybe we won't.
They write some helpful things sometimes.
They write some awful things, is that what you said? Thought that's what you said.
So maybe for the next meeting, we should have like a redlined version of this ordinance. That maybe Zach can send me his
Sure.
notes on what he wrote down for proposed changes.
Yep.
And Tanny can send me his notes on proposed changes, and we could
Send.
create a redlined version. And then also start talking about the criteria and design standards. I think the notification is something we can just implement without needing to change anything. We could just internally implement that. We might want to codify, like, we might want it to be added to the ordinance for the future, but I think it's not too much to ask.
Sure.
For the time being. I think we're sending all notifications. It's
Appreciate it.
just me making sure I send them to you, so I will mentally ask myself to send them to all of you. Done. But I think that's an easy, low ticket, easy thing to do. It's the other things that'll take a little bit longer for us to finesse, and then probably present all of it to council at one time instead of going back to them twice. So having the criteria laid out and having the changes to this ordinance laid out and presenting that to them simultaneously.
Text amendments and the ordinance both.
Yeah. It's a lot.
That's an all or nothing.
It's an all or nothing.
So long, so long as it doesn't slow us down into any future decisions of what's going on, we gotta kind of be ahead of it
Yeah.
and get on it.
Well, it would give us the ability really to make future decisions
Right.
that we can't make now, so.
Right, so if you,
So
like, because if you were to
sooner-
modify this
sooner the better.
language, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you'd have any criteria that
Yeah,
it wouldn't really change anything. You need that criteria to assist you with those changes.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, staff communication.
We have our Windy Wonderland and tree lighting event the first weekend of December. So we're working on that right now. That is a downtown-wide event.
Is that the first or is that the second?
First, second,
It's the
third.
first, second, and third. It's the whole weekend.
Right, you said you sent it.
We have a holiday market that's gonna be in the Troutdale house. We rented the Troutdale house. We might also use the general store for some community organizing stuff, since it hasn't been rented yet. And we've got Selfies with Santa in Forward Design Group, and we've got the tree lighting on Sunday, December 3rd at 5 p.m. So there'll be lots of fun stuff going on that weekend, all downtown. So please come out and support your downtown, and tell your friends to come out and support downtown that weekend. Lots of shopping. We, on another project that I'm project managing, is our strategic destination and marketing plan. So we're nearing the final stage of that. I just reviewed the draft with the consultant today. So hopefully there's going to be a presentation to council in January on that, and you all will be welcome to attend that if you want to learn more about what we've done with that. I think that it dovetails the town center plan really nicely. And the strategic goals that are identified and the action steps that are identified in that plan really build upon the tourism and branding and marketing elements of the town center plan. And took a lot of notes from the town center plan to thus create this. So I think all it does is really strengthen and enhance the town center plan. I could also potentially present it to you guys all here as well, but I think that the consultant is only paid to do one public meeting, so they'll probably do it to council if we just want to have you guys attend that. So I'm really excited about that. That'll help guide us moving forward. The city is still hiring for a new community development director. I don't have any updates on how that process is going. I don't know how that process is going, but I know they're hiring. And I think that's it for me.
Okay.
Can you do a favor, make sure to notify us when that meeting is, city council meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Victoria. Yeah.
Just say that I'm in favor of this board being notified of any applications going on in the town center corridor, and let us filter what we think we need to discuss and debate and comment on. But I would like to know what's going on with everything that's in the town center. This is a public knowledge, really.
No comments.
No, I just want to apologize for my tardiness tonight. I ended the day in Corvallis and I-5 was a mess with the rain, so I apologize.
Traffic was horrible. Did you come on the freeway?
I-5 North, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was nice. Nope, nothing.
Nothing? Adrian, do you have anything?
Nope, not really. Good discussion tonight. I wish I was there in person, but unfortunately I'm occupied elsewhere. But yeah, good to listen to everybody.
Shirley?
No, but I want to thank the Department of Public Works. They did a great job of clearing out the storm drains in our area before the monsoon season is upon us. And they did a great job because I asked them to come out and look at mine that's in front of my house, and they were within an hour they were there. So I'm really appreciative of the that department because they do a great job. And that's all.
Diane, are you there? See, Paul went away, so.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Can, yes.
Hi, okay, thanks for all you leading that discussion. Anything I needed to say, somebody eventually did say. So, I appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments, and I think the direction that we're going to go is going to help do some things that the town center had envisioned and just have a little bit more input, which is nice, because just like when we selected the people we thought would be best for the waterfront, there was a lot of time and discussion that went into that. And I think us vetting things like that is useful for anybody else that needs to evaluate, including the city council. So I appreciate, Marley, your hard work and everybody's comments tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Do you need a motion to
So we'll get together.
But yeah, our
Next
next meeting date.
The
By the
14th.
way, I know part of the topic at the
Second.
end of the last meeting was whether or not we were gonna get an update on the urban renewal area at the next city council meeting, and there's not going to be an update. They have to postpone it because we don't yet have an update. So again, there's no, haven't heard back from the outlet mall yet, so no update to give. So good thing we didn't plan our whole meeting around that, because it wouldn't have made a difference. And right now we're meeting on the Thursday of the month. So if we were to do that again next month, it would be the 14th. Which let me just double check the Kellogg Room calendar. There we go. Looks like there's nothing on the agenda that evening. However, the 12th is City Council, and the 13th is Planning Commission. So it might be a busy week for people who are involved.
Because public safety's on the Monday.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's not on this calendar yet. So public safety is on the 11th.
Is the 14th?
Yeah, it's like a straight flush, it just goes.
Yeah,
What's going on?
because no one wants
We
to
might
do
not-
their
I'm
meetings
sorry.
the
We
next
don't even
week.
have a meeting next week.
Right.
Right.
Big shotgun.
So we can meet on the 14th, or we
And then
can
bump it to January.
postpone into January and try to do a lot of research between now and January, so we can have this conversation about the criteria and design standards between, gather all that
What you
information
looking for?
January. It's up to you all.
So do we want to postpone to January, but be on hold in case something happens on our development down here, or we have to appeal?
Sounds great.
Is that what you guys want to do?
Meet to appeal.
Oh, no, postpone until January. And just be on hold in case.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
With me anyway.
With the goal of January, looking at examples of design standards,
Yes.
what their,
Looking at
what
ours, yeah,
what their
work
town
session.
center looks like,
Yeah.
and then what their code looks like.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
Deal.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Zach.
Aye.
All right.
Have a good weekend.
Happy holiday season.
All right.
Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Something